Robert Downey Jr.
Ah, yeah,
His name was escaping me. You did a breakdown of him in quite a confrontational interview, actually,
yeah.
which most people would probably have found terrifying. And they would have given in and said too much, or they would have not respected their own boundaries.
Hmm.
Um, do you recall this video that I'm talking about?
Yes, totally. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Would you mind maybe explaining it? You probably do it better than I do.
Yes. So let's see. So he's in an interview with a guy from the BBC, and it's for a movie. And they have before these interviews, they agree about the types of things they're going to talk about. It's really just an advertising pitch for the movie. But the interviewer wanted to get, I guess, a juicy scoop. So he started asking about Robert Downey Jr.'s past. And he asked a number of passive aggressive, I would say, questions regarding his drug history.
Mm-hmm.
And he started saying, like, that doesn't really seem related to what we're talking about here. And the guy continued. So throughout that, you can watch his body tense, as I think a lot of ours would, and he begins to get frustrated. But the way that he deals with it I think, is fantastic and is really appropriate. He first subtly directs the conversation away with a joke. That's enough for most people, but the interviewer is persistent. The interviewer asks another question about drugs. He makes a direct comment. He says, are we on Diane Sawyer? Like, this doesn't seem like what we ought to be talking about. And then the guy asks a third one, and he says, okay, that's going to be it. I'm going to pack up my stuff. And he just calmly walks out of the room. And I think that is a fantastic model for boundaries that you might have in your own life when someone is treating you in a way that you don't like, whether they're putting you down, whatever it is. And it's generally, first, a joking redirect is really strong. Second, directly calling it out in a direct, but you're not making them wrong. You're not saying you're a jerk for doing this. You're saying this isn't what we ought to be talking about right now, or I'd prefer if we didn't talk about this. And then if they don't respect your request, it's to simply remove yourself from the situation. So that video has provided for me sort of a framework to think about conflict when I have people who are overstepping boundaries that I might
Thank you. Yes, you explained it so much better than I would have.
have.
And as I'm watching that, I mean, he is just so powerful in that interview. The way he's ticked off, but he
Hmm.
stays composed. I'm just wondering, I mean, how would someone get practice responding in that way? Because once you get into fight or flight, all bets are off. And or at least for myself, my face would be red and I'd be probably sweating. And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are there ways that you can kind of practice having that sense of calm or those boundaries?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the first one comes from a lot of the self-esteem exercises that I described will really make clear what your boundaries are. Because if you go through and you're like, if I respected myself 5% more today, you might say, I wouldn't let this friend put me down in this way. And that'll make clear, like, oh man, I need to have a boundary here. But then in terms of practice, there's certainly times in your life where it doesn't blindside you. In that interview, he was pretty blindsided, and it's impressive that he kept his composure. But I talked about getting on the phone and knowing that there was conflict coming. You might have someone in your life that you know that you need to speak to. So what you can do before those is you can plan out. This is a longer thing, but kind of a decision tree. And if you're in Charisma University, which you are, the conflict module at the end talks about this at length. But basically, you can go through and plan out the most likely flow of conversation. And I talk about things to make sure that it doesn't devolve into them yelling at you. So it's a pretty simple flow. And then just having a sense of, okay, I'm going to say this. They're either going to respond positively, accept what I said, in which case, great, conversation over, or they're going to say, I'll call you whatever I want. I don't care. Like, you're supposed to take it, in which case I'm going to respond like this, and they'll accept it, or they'll say, well, if you don't like me enough to let me be honest with you, then we're not friends. And then you have a third option there. So preparing that decision tree before conflict that you know is coming can be very powerful. And then there's always the situations where you are just somebody surprises you. And the best thing that you can do if you are not prepared is control your breathing, your body language, meaning you're going to breathe deeper. You're going to open up your body language. You're going to expose your elbows, your wrist, your throat. One quick story is that I had a semi-surprise performance review when I was in the consulting world, and it was a mixed review. There were some good things, but there were some not good things, and I wasn't prepared for it. But the best thing that I was able to do was to sit in my chair, and I felt myself wanting to lock up, fire back, either immediately apologize or immediately say, no, that's not right, or say, well, you told me not to do that, and instead to just slow down my breathing, sit in the chair, purposefully open my elbows, the inner elbow, expose it, my wrist, expose it, pull my shoulders back and my chest, all the vulnerable spots, to physically show those to the person, to uncross my legs. That put me in a state of mind that was much more capable of a thoughtful response than that closed off knee jerk reaction would have been. So those are the high level things that I would consider.
Thank you so much, Charlie. So it sounds like that open body language serves two purposes. It subconsciously tells your own mind that you're safe and confident, and
Mm-hmm.
it's also a message to the other person that you're confident.
Exactly. And I think honestly, the one that is most powerful is the first one, because when we get into that freak out fight or flight mode, everything speeds up. We give ourselves less time than we truly have. And a 5-second pause, while it can feel like an eternity to the person who is being expected to speak, is really not that long. And it gives you enough time to gather your thoughts and think. And it also opens that other person up because it makes them, okay, how is he going to respond?